To take care of our people and our workers, we must replace the present policy of globalism, which has moved so many jobs and so much wealth out of our country, and replace it with a new policy of Americanism. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers radio show. Now here are your hosts, Jason Van Taper and Jim White.
The healing powers of silver, Ion Silver, an antiseptic powerhouse used for centuries. Now you can harness the benefits of Ion Silver in a convenient spray. Ion Silver is a highly effective antimicrobial spray that's safe for family and pets. Excellent for wound care, a must for your first aid kit. It binds to bacteria, viruses, and fungus to immediately destroy them. Also used as an underarm deodorant, acne preventative, surface disinfectant, and more. Buy Ion Silver at ionsilver.us. That's ionsilver.us.
You're on the air live. Thanks for joining us here on the Liberty Brothers radio show.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
John, I have an introduction for you. Thanks again for joining us. John Casey is the co-founder and chairman of the International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center. Mr. Casey is also the president of Veritence Incorporated, a science and engineering consulting company, and Veritence Publishing Incorporated, a company established to aid scientists, nature and science fiction authors to get their books published. He was, previous to 2015, the president of the Space and Science Research Corporation, a leading client science research organization. Mr. Casey is a former White House Space Program Advisor, NASA headquarters and Congressional consultant, and was a senior field engineer on the Space Shuttle program. He's a leading researcher on science of solar activity cycles and their impacts on climate change and associated catastrophic geophysical events, including earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. He is also the author of the widely acclaimed climate science books, including the 2011 climate book Cold Sun, its 2014 remake and nationwide bestseller Dark Winter, and the December 12, 2016 book Upheaval, Why Catastrophic Earthquakes Will Soon Strike the United States. John Casey, thanks so much for joining us today on the Liberty Brothers radio show.
Great to be with you.
Well, I'll tell you what, John, I'm about a quarter of a way through your book. I don't have as much time to read as I used to, books anyway. But I did see you on another YouTube channel talking about the events, and I was compelled to reach out to you. I purchased your book immediately after I saw that special with David, and I immediately purchased your book. And as I said, I began reading it. And I tell you something, John. You know, I certainly want to talk about hope and optimistic things. But to start off, we could have some very tumultuous times ahead, to say the least. What say you about that, John?
Well, it's certainly the case if you believe in scientific facts and you follow history. To a large extent, all I'm doing and my scientific team that helped create the book you're referring to, Upheaval, is merely repeating the past. That's what we're doing when we predict the very tumultuous period of geophysical events that we're facing, both catastrophic activity. In the other book, several decade period at least of very cold weather. So a new cold climate is coming along with these earthquakes and volcanoes. And yes, it's going to be very difficult, but again, it's all a repeat of natural cycles.
And when is this supposed to start happening? When do you foresee we're going to start? I mean, obviously this winter, at least where we were in the mountains of northwest Montana, it was the worst winter we've had in 25 years. Is it the start of the cycle now, or is it something we're going to see in a decade or so?
The cycle's actually already begun. In 2007, I predicted that the peak of the 2007 and 2010, I had a news conference the following year and announced that, in fact, global warming had ended based on this 206-year-long cycle, and that we would be heading down to a very bitter cold 2031 at the bottom of the cold cycle. So the grand cycle has already gone over from global warming to a global cooling period. We have already seen very real evidence of that this year with the disastrous damage to European vegetable crops. This is where you had shelves in many European nations and Great Britain where there was no vegetables at all to buy during the month of February. To a large extent, people were fighting over heads of lettuce, a very difficult period. And we're seeing similar changes in the southern hemisphere already. The glaciers in New Zealand, the many beautiful glaciers they had that had been melting for decades, have now started growing again. And we're seeing anecdotal cold weather events all over now. And that includes what you've seen in Montana and certainly this northeast snow and cold record. Even here in Florida, where I am, we had a record cold in Gainesville, Florida, and a record cold in Jacksonville, Florida. And we're not used to that kind of thing. So the cycle has already begun to shift from the past of global warming to a new cold era.
You know, John, you've talked about food. You talked about food, and you know, we had just had this right before you'd come on. We had sort of brought this topic up, and you know, I told Jason, I think the people that are going to be sort of, you know, if there's any, as a matter of fact, I made the statement, if there's any entrepreneurs out there that want to really forge ahead and be on the cutting edge of the future, I think that it's food production. I think that indoor food production and ways to be able to, I'm talking large scale indoor food production, because if I remember correctly, John, and you can certainly correct me on this, I believe you're calling for about a 30% food production loss every year. And if I remember 28 and 29, you're thinking 100% loss perhaps. So food is going to be a major, major issue worldwide coming up in no short amount of time. What do you think about that statement?
Well, you're absolutely right. Those were some of the numbers I threw out over the last 10 years, and they still remain fairly accurate. We should be prepared every year for at least a 30% food loss in the major crops of wheat, soybeans, and corn, not to mention other vegetable crops. But that's a good planning guideline. It's based on historical evidence. If you go back and you look at the last time this grand 206-year cycle of the sun went cold on us, it was much worse than just a 30% loss. And that's why I've indicated that at the bottom of this cold cycle, I wouldn't be surprised if we had catastrophic near 100% losses during a few years. Not year after year necessarily, but we should be prepared for catastrophic crop losses during this new cold cycle. And by the way, this cycle I'm predicting in these cold weather events, my Russian colleagues say it's going to be much worse than that. They're actually predicting a little ice age is coming. I'm not totally convinced of that yet, and it looks like most of my forecasts are coming about. But we should bear in mind that others say it's going to be much, much colder. Crop loss is much worse than even what I'm predicting.
John, how do we begin to prepare for this? I mean, if it's out there and you know, someone of your stature and background, your pedigree, is sounding the warning bells, and it's also happening across the world and your colleagues in Russia, how do we begin to prepare for such an event?
Well, that's really what all of my public presentations are about, and what I say, and certainly what I said in Dark Winter, and especially in the new book, Upheaval, which focuses on the earthquake collateral damage that comes during these cold cycles. It's really a great deal of that book is dedicated to preparation. I'd like to pick up on what you said. I don't know, is it Jason or Jim that mentioned it, but the issue of growing crops indoors and the innovation that's coming already, regardless of this new cold era. We're seeing some pretty impressive stuff happening in terms of what people are doing to grow crops inside using the right frequencies of LED lights, basically multi-level stacks of hydroponic growth going on inside facilities. I think that has a lot of promise. And let me focus on a key point I always put out at the end of my presentations, which is every cold cycle, someone makes a great deal of money. I don't want people just to survive the next cold era. I want them to thrive. I want them to be innovative, plan ahead, think ahead, devote their lives and their investments toward things that will do well during the next cold era, which is going to be at least 30 years long.
You know, John, historically speaking, you know, the thing that troubles me a little bit, and well, a lot, I think if I remember correctly, it was back in 1812 when we had the last, or sometime around that period, when we had the last New Madrid eruption, and I want to say the population density back in 1812 was a fraction of the same a population that lives in that vicinity as we speak today. This is a real serious. I mean, this is. I'm going to sound dramatic, but something like happens in 1812 happens today or this coming week. We're talking about losses at a biblical proportions, perhaps, John, and some of these people that live around that area. I mean, they need to get prepared. I mean, like when they get done listening to this broadcast, I mean, this is something that is I don't want to say it's imminent, but high probability. Would you agree?
Absolutely a high probability. In the New Madrid Fault, which is what you're referring to, back in 1811 and 1812, the winter of 1811, we had 3 catastrophic earthquakes between 7.0 and 8.0, and many, many hundreds of aftershocks, also very powerful during that period of time. You're right. We were a very young country at that point. We only had about 5 million citizens, not including Native Americans. We have, of course, approaching 335 million now, and millions in that immediate danger zone. That danger zone of the New Madrid Fault takes into account 8 different states. And what we found out was there's a greater than 80% chance of another catastrophic quake, and possibly several within a very short period of time, beginning as early as this year through 2038. And again, this is not pure speculation. This is based on very sound science that we documented in our book. We've certainly looked at California and the Cascadia subduction zone. We've looked at Charleston, which is like Puerto Rico, oftentimes gets hit with isolated large magnitude quakes. But our biggest threat and our biggest concern in the book Upheaval was clearly the New Madrid Fault. So you're right to be concerned about that, not just because of the property damage and loss of life, but what we also found out was that if we have a catastrophic quake in that area, we will probably see the major pipelines that provide oil and gas and fuel to the Northeast states completely destroyed, and without being able to be repaired for months, if not years following. So that's going to provide a very substantial collateral damage to the Northeast states, who's going to run out of fuel and gas for their power plants, for their cars, for their home heating, and possibly, if it repeats like 1811, 1812, right in the middle of the coldest part of the winter. So we're very concerned about the New Madrid Fault. But I will tell you, the team of international scientists that I led that produced this work, we were quite surprised. We knew there was a strong correlation between these cold climate events caused by the sun and earthquakes, but this is truly remarkable what this book lays out in terms of the very high probability of a New Madrid rupture, multiple ruptures in California, another Cascadia event, massive quakes in Alaska, Charleston, and Puerto Rico.
John, what's the correlation? What's what's the connection between the solar event and the earthquakes, if you can break it down in kind of a layman's short answer?
Well, the mechanism is not understood by science, and you'll appreciate the fact that no one puts any money into global cooling research. Certainly the last 8 years, the Obama administration only funded global warming research. So we are in a camp that's been pretty well unfunded in terms of figuring out why the sun does this. What we do know with great certainty and high probability, however, is that during the times when the sun cuts back on its energy output, and we measure that by sunspot counts, quite simply, and we go to a very low period of sunspot counts on the sun, we have our worst earthquakes and our worst volcanic eruptions.
You know, right now we see over in Italy, I think it's Mount Etna. We see that displaying some eruptions. I don't think it's anything like it can be. About a couple of weeks ago, I want to say in Hawaii, there was lava shooting out of the side of like sort of the side of a mountain into the water for a couple of days. Is this all part of just the beginning of what we're seeing here, John? I mean, is you know, and I there's a couple of other YouTube channels that I watch, and they talk about because of this because of the solar winds and all this together, that the radiation goes down into the core, sort of our magnetic field could have directs it down into the core, and it sort of heats up the magma, and then we have all these events. Is that something that you're on board with? Or, you know, I'm, like I said, I'm not a scientist at all, don't claim to be.
Well,
but
yeah, that's kind of a stretch scientifically, but what we do know is one of our leading scientists in the International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center that I lead is totally convinced, with good reason, of his theory of what's called a leaking capacitor model of the planet Earth. Basically, what he's saying is during this 200-year cycle of the sun, most of that time is dedicated to warming up the Earth, charging the Earth's inner core, and then when the sun shuts down this heating up and this charging phase, the Earth starts to discharge energy, and that could result in volcanic and earthquake activity. So you're very close to a possible theory for why this may be working.
John, you touched on thriving during these upheavals, and I think that, again, we always want to kind of focus on the hope and the preparedness side of things. You talked about certain industries. I'd like you to go in a little bit at what you think would be good investments for people to make, and also possibly, obviously, they're going to be places that are dangerous to have your family living, more dangerous than other places. So where would you suggest people, as they look at their short-term future going into the next 10 years or so, 5-10 years, do they want to look at relocation? If so, where's going to be safer places to be within the U.S.?
Well, in our book, we're very specific about this. We don't dodge that question at all. It is the first step in the preparation for individuals and families, businesses, and government agencies, that if you are, in fact, in these very high-risk threat zones, that are likely to have catastrophic quakes between 2017 and 2038, we simply recommend in step one to relocate, to get out of the way of what's coming. And we do this, again, because of the very high probabilities we calculated, the very high chances of these quakes repeating again on this regular cycle. And so we believe it's simply not worth a life, a career, your family. So we recommend step one to get out. However, if you do, our book tells you where these danger areas are, so you'll know if you're in one. It also says that if you do decide to stay for whatever reason, let's say you don't accept the premise of the book and are 80% or greater probability of a catastrophic quake, and you say, well, I'll just ride it out. We've never had a quake here before, none that big. It's probably not going to happen. If that's the case, I recommend everyone hedge their bets. Make sure that you have a lot of food stored, water stored, the ability to defend your home. And these are good steps we recommend in the book Upheaval, but they're also good steps for a number of catastrophic eventualities, whether it be an EMP attack from North Korea, or whether it be a global volcanic eruption like we had in 1815 with Mount Tambora. If we have a loss of the grid because of a solar flare like we had in 1859, the so-called Carrington event, if that happens, that will literally wipe out the entire U.S. grid. And without the grid, there's no power, no TV, no radio. Where are you going to go for assistance? So there's a lot of threats that are out there. And so if you follow the preparation steps in our book, you'll be in pretty good shape, regardless whether there's an earthquake in your area.
John, we're up here. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, what? Just touching on the second part of that question real quick. What investments? How do people thrive through this besides moving?
Well, Jason, I've had actually many people come to me with business ideas that they want me to sponsor or help them with. We're going to try to stay on the path of purity here and focus on the science. So we aren't in the business of recommending investing in anything. However, let's step back and look at what we're talking about in a general sense. We're talking about a new cold era where there will be dramatic shortages of food. So any investment in anything that will improve someone's ability to thrive during food deprivation is good. For example, there are many companies out there that sell long-duration food supplies. I'm a very strong believer in those. And again, whether it's for an earthquake, volcanic eruption, civil disturbance, or what have you, it's just a good practical thing to do. Have at least a one-year food supply on hand and something that's long-lasting. If you look at power sources, there's a lot of things you can do if the grid goes down. From a power standpoint, I recommend people look into getting independent power supplies and being able to get off the grid. Bottom line in all of these things, if you look at what we think will happen, loss of grid, loss of water, loss of fuel, loss of power, what can you as an individual do to back up?
John, I hate to interrupt. We're coming up to our break. We'll be back in just a couple minutes and get right back to you. So hold on, folks. We're talking with John Casey about some of this upheaval that's coming our way. We'll be back on the other side of the break with the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. All right, and welcome back to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. It's Sunday evening, and we're on the home stretch. Before we get back to our guest, John Casey, I just want to remind everyone that Revolution Radio is the largest listener-supported internet radio network in the world, and that takes some doing, so we need your help to do that. So if you love what you get on Revolution Radio, please do your part by voting with your dollar. Go to freedomslips.com. You can just click on the donate button and give what you can. Help keep us on the air and getting this important information out to you guys in a way you're not getting anywhere else. I also want to encourage you, we've been talking about food storage and ways to kind of stack the deck to your advantage, and one way you can help support the show is through purchasing your own storable foods through Food for Liberty. We've got the Numana organic packs. We've got some of the only packs out there with non-GMO. It's got meat. It's got everything you need. So check it out. Food for Liberty, FOR, Liberty, /Liberty, and that will help go directly towards supporting Jim and myself in this show, and also help support your family get through some of the scenarios we're talking about here. So again, all right, John, thank you for coming on the show. This has just been a great interview. and we kind of got cut off before the break there. And so let's just get right back into it. Jim, I'm going to let you kick off with the next question.
Okay, John. Thanks for being back with us here after the break. You know, we had another guest on previously talking about some of the coming mini ice age. We live here in northwest Montana, John, which I think is not exactly completely out of the danger zone, but certainly not as perilous as some other parts of the country by any means, especially where we're located up here by Glacier Park, where I am anyway. But what he had said is with the coming cold, this may be this area up here, although it could be good for some things, it's not going to be he didn't say it wouldn't be inhabitable. It would just be so costly to live here because of there's just be no growing season. We don't have a big one as it is around here. So I got to believe that the growing season in places like northwest Montana would pretty much cease for, say, 30 years. Do you think that's an accurate assumption?
If the Russians are correct, it may be close. I do not think it will be that bad. We're still going to have 4 seasons, but we're going to have much longer and colder winters. Winters that will impact just before harvest and make it very difficult to grow anything during typical spring planting. So we're going to have to make fairly substantial judgments or adjustments. What that means is we may see ourselves growing things at 1 or 2 climatic zones more southerly than we are doing now. So yes, it's a very real reason to be concerned. I think the best thing to do is go back and look at history for anyone's area 200 years ago, 206 years ago specifically, see what it was like. There are historical documents, even from the Lewis and Clark expedition that went through that area, or close to it, about the same time. So we do know that we're going to have truly brutal cold winters that are much longer than normal, very difficult growing seasons. We're going to have a shorter growing season, and that's going to be the key thing. And it gets back to one of the comments you've made about crops and how to adjust. Development or planting or relying on cold hardy crops is going to be essential. If you look at food storage, again, I really believe a minimum 1-year food supply using any of the variety of long-term food storage companies that are out there, including your own, are things to look at. Everyone should be considering these realities. For example, I know we're looking at cold hardy rice down in Latin America because they've already had some devastating cold down in Brazil and so forth. So a lot of things are happening. I think if we look at indoor food growing, that's going to be a huge industry in the future. So there's a lot of things we can do to mitigate these coming cold cycles that our forefathers 206 years ago simply couldn't do. But we will have the technology to get through it. But we need to start working on it. We just can't wait until we lose 30% of our corn, wheat, and soybeans to say, what do we do now? We need to start planning on it now.
You know, I want to follow up real quick, John. I saw an article where I believe in parts of Russia, they're growing crops indoors in greenhouse type scenarios and 45 degree below zero weather. So, I mean, the technology is available. And, you know, what we don't want to do certainly is, you know, put forth a doom and gloom scenario, because populations have survived these events before, right, John? I mean, obviously we're talking now, this is not very long ago, a couple hundred years ago this happened. So, I mean, this is not a dagger in the heart of the nation by any means. We're just going to have to, perhaps some people may have to relocate. Some people may have to change the way that they grow food or consume food. But other than that, I mean, this is not we shouldn't look at it. This is sort of an opportunity. I mean, I look at it sort of as an opportunity, John, in a sense. It's going to be painful to some people, but this should not be a doom and gloom scenario. That's not what you want to paint, I'm sure, is it?
Actually, I see both as unfolding. I think it's going to be a tremendous investment opportunity. I think there are going to be a lot of new billionaires and multi-billionaires that come out because they're getting ready and providing what people need during this next cold era. On the other hand, I'll disagree with you just a tad on the issue of doom and gloom. When you go back and look at history, the last time this cold cycle hit, everyone grew their own food for the most part. Very few people were totally dependent on someone else for food. And unfortunately, things have reversed now. Only something like 8 to 10% of farmers exist now, where most people were farmers back then. And so we're very heavily dependent on other people to supply food to us right now. Inner cities in major metropolitan areas are going to be very difficult places to live once the food shortages come, once prices go up. And by the way, price increases will be substantial based on past history. Again, all we're saying is that this is coming around again. It's been here before. We need to be prepared for it. But we should be prepared for dramatically higher prices and far shorter food supplies than what we have now. I recently did an article and sent it out to the world, at least my world. It basically was called peak global food. I mean, we've passed now, I believe, the time of the bumper crops that we've had in the last 10 years. I think that is now over. I think we're looking at fairly long-term, 20, 30-year period now where global food yields are going to decline as if we look at conventional crop production methods. Only through these unconventional means that we've been talking about, growing food indoors, like the Russian example you mentioned, we're really going to change that significantly, but we need to do that. But I don't think there's any way we can sidestep the issue that our vast population here in the U.S. is heavily dependent on just a few people for food. And when the food shortage hits, there's going to be a lot of conflict, no question. So again, preparation, anticipation, learning what's happening, and learning what's going to come are truly essential for anyone that wants to not only survive, but to thrive, to do well in the coming 20 to 30 years.
So start learning how to garden now. Start learning your hydroponic systems. And you know, I've got a home hydroponic system that has very low draw LED lights that is just amazing, the amount of food it can grow for my family. So yeah, we really need to start rethinking things. Changing gears.
Oh, we certainly do.
Go ahead, John.
We certainly do. I've got a friend, for example, who has a system set up for raising tilapia. And he raises so much he has to give it away by the truckloads. It's just,
wow.
You know, if you set up these systems, you can not only take care of yourself, but take care of a lot of other people as well.
John, let me switch gears here a little bit. You had mentioned that there wasn't much funding for people looking at, instead of global warming, global cooling research.
Right.
Were you ostracized by the scientific community during a certain part of time for your work? And do you think that things will change now with the change of administration, change of who's at the head of the EPA and whatnot? Do you think things are changing as far as the support of this research goes?
Yes and no. Yes, I was ostracized, criticized, slandered, libeled, whatever you want to call it. But I knew that was coming. Back in April of 2007, I knew when I began my public speaking about this new cold era, that was the height of the global warming fever back then. And immediately I was attacked and ridiculed. And I'm not talking about just the usual stuff you see on the web. I'm talking about PhD scientists that were making preposterous statements about who I was and my credentials and so forth. And what we've learned subsequently in the ClimateGate scandal was that there are many, many PhDs out there who made a lot of money and got very famous for manipulating climate data and not telling the truth about the climate. So they certainly attacked me during that time. But I'm not the only one. There are many people who've stood up and said, you know, this man-made global warming isn't what we were told. The science behind it is unreliable science, and that we should be looking at alternatives. I am not currently part of the Trump administration scientific team focused on combating man-made global warming. I am a researcher. Stop this entire discussion about CO2 and get ready for the new coal climate. CO2 that really causes. I'm
Okay.
Yeah, I was losing the audio there for a minute. John, you know, we're talking about this here on this program. You're writing books. You're going on radio programs. There are David and other people out there are trying to put this information out to as many people as we can. But you realize that we live in a society where you have to almost get hit by the side of the head with a 2x4 before anybody actually does anything. How long before the average TV watcher, the average, 9 to 5, the average Joe, gets it before they start seeing signs that what you're saying? I mean, of course, barring an absolute catastrophic earthquake, your data would be proven, of course, at that time. But I'm talking about the cold. I'm talking about the mini ice age. How long do you think, in your view, before the average person starts going, wait a minute, there's going to be some cold weather coming here. I better get ready. I mean, are we talking, is that months away? Is that a year away? I mean, when are they going to start really getting it? Because it concerns me. People are very complacent. That's unfortunately the disease that we suffer from here in this nation.
Yes. Jim, you're absolutely right. That is really the central question that I've been asking, and people have been asking me for 10 years now. When does it become so compelling, this change to the cold climate, that it's unmistakable and that we need to get very serious about it? The answer to that actually was brought out in 2015, 2016, when we had a spike in global temperatures and set near warm records globally. That particular solar energy outburst that caused the heating of the Earth for that 2-year period was crucial from a scientific analysis standpoint. And if you go back and look at my research in the 206-year cycle, the cycle switches over to deep cold only after that spike in warming occurs. And it's very predictable, it is very reliable, and that's why I indicated that we had a peak global warming occur in 2016 and that it's only downhill from now. So to be specific in your question, I think we're 3 to 5 years away at the most before the cold is so bad and so crop destructive that even the diehard man-made global warming advocates will have to rethink their theory. So we'll start seeing real solid damage. Again, we've already seen it this year. In February in Europe, we saw the first instance of cold climate crop damage that I've been predicting for some time. We should start seeing that happen on a fairly regular basis. And it may take, as you say, a 2x4 between the eyes. It may take a very significant loss of crops, a very significant earthquake, or a very significant volcanic event before this really impacts everyone's day-to-day life. My wife is fond of telling me, the science is great, but until it affects someone's stomach or their wallet, they're not going to do much about it.
John, are the governments of the world, obviously they must know about this, they've got the high-level scientists, are they preparing in any way behind the scenes?
Yes, they are. I'm convinced they are. If you look at the Russians, for example, in our country, if you were to come out and talk about the next cold climate, you would be treated like I have been, quite frankly. You'd be ostracized, criticized. People would try to destroy your credentials, your career. You'd be fired if you were a government scientist. That's just the opposite in Russia, just the opposite. Russian scientists that want to talk about the serious damage that's coming, the potential disaster from the new cold climate, are free to do so. They're exalted. The media prints their literature and articles about them. They're seen on TV. So Russia's looking at this very differently than the U.S. right now, and they should, because Russia's a very cold country by its latitude. I'm sure there are others as well who are doing so. This is not just the U.S. that lives on this planet. We only occupy 1.7% of the Earth's surface. So you've got a lot of other surface area with a lot of other continents where people have a different attitude about global warming than we do here in the U.S.
You know, John, we like to have people, you know, not believe anything we say, but to look things up on their own, of course, because that's, you know, when you really absorb it much better when you're doing your own research. Yes. But we live in an era, as you all know, and I'm going to, you know, use the term that's popularized these days. We live in an era of fake news, and I know, you know, we like you just discussed, there certainly are some, you know, fiduciary benefits for these people to propagate fake news. So where does the person that's listening to this broadcast, what reliable source can you direct them to that's going to just cut through the BS, not have any propaganda, not have any you know, sponsorship from anybody that has, you know, any skin in the game? Where can we send people that they can really just get good, solid, true blue info, John?
Well, certainly I can recommend they go to my websites and or pick up Dark Winter and Upheaval. I strongly recommend people pick up Upheaval. You can get the book, or you can get the electronic book. You can download that right now for 1/3 the price of the paperback book. So that's a really great way to go. You can get that at my website, Veritence Publishing. .com. That's Veritence, VERITENCE, veritencepublishing.com, or you can pick it up at Amazon or from the publisher Trafford.com. Most people get it from Amazon, of course, but if you go to Veritence, you can get a discount just by saying you heard about it on Revolution Radio with the Liberty Brothers. We'll take 10% off and sign it. You'll get an autographed book, and it'll be shipped to you free of charge.
Is there any order you would suggest people read your work in?
You broke up a little bit. You there?
Yeah, I think we're having trouble connected to the studio, but we are connected now.
Did you have a question?
I do encourage everyone like you have to do their own research, come to their own conclusions. If you Google cold climate or cold climate experts or John Casey climate expert, you'll see a lot about me and people who believe in what I'm saying, including other scientists. But go online, look at Google cold climate, find out whatever you can about the other scientists around the world who are now saying the same thing I am. By the way, I'm also the founder and director of the Global Cooling Awareness Project. That's an effort to enlist the signatures of people with 4-year science degrees who believe that we have a new cold climate coming. And online and in the book, Dark Winter and Upheaval, you'll see a list of scientists around the world who are doing the same thing I am in their countries, telling their government, their people, their media to get ready for a new cold climate.
John, the question I was trying to ask when we broke up is, what originally brought you to this line of work?
You know, Jason, every researcher, every scientist wants to have their own eureka moment where they discover something new, something impactful on a lot of people. That actually occurred to me 2 p.m. I was doing some research for another totally unrelated book, but it required me to dig pretty deep into solar activity, solar energy output, and some solar physics. At a particular point, several sets of data came together in an instant for me and told me that not only does mankind have little or nothing to do with climate change, but the sun was about to go through this critical changeover from roughly 200 years of global warming into 20 to 30 years of potentially catastrophic cold weather. That moment back in 2007 hit me pretty hard, like it should, like any decent guy would get hit knowing that information. And I decided at that point that I was not going to retire as I was about to do, but that I was going to rededicate myself to getting people made aware of the bad science of man-made global warming and the good science of solar activity, climate change. And so I kind of took on that quest back then, and I've been doing it ever since. It's just the kind of thing that does happen when you have those eureka moments. You come up with something so compelling, you just want to tell everyone about it.
Well, John, I truly appreciate your work, and I'm so looking forward to finishing your book. That book, the name of that book is Upheaval. The music's coming on right now. Real quick, John, before we go, can you give out your website one more time? And I want to say thank you so much for being here today.
VeritencePublishing.com, VERITENCE Publishing.com. Jason, Jim, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, John. All right, folks, that's the show for this week. We'll be back next Sunday evening. Thanks for joining us and spending your Sunday evening here on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show.